Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. God made man in his own image and likeness. And frankly, when man loses sight of God, man loses sight of the meaning of his existence and his own humanity. Joining me to talk about this is Stephen White. In his recent article for The Catholic Thing, A Light Shines in the Darkness, he tackles exactly this, the meaning of human existence. Stephen, thank you for joining us. How are you?
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Marcus.
Stephen, for all of you listening, he's no stranger to this program, executive director of the St. John Paul II National Shrine and a fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. So, Stephen, let's let's talk about the meaning of human existence specifically. When we talk about defining the self, which you and I both know, especially since the French Revolution, the whole definition of the self has gone out the window in terms of just being completely abstract. But what does it really mean to say a person? What does it mean to say the self?
Well, it's part of our human nature, if I can skip ahead a little bit, to wonder about these things, to ask these questions about ourselves. So the very fact that we're asking that question tells us something about the kind of thing we are and the way we go about our business. So I think it's sort of part of who we are to ask these kinds of questions. So it's not bad to ask these questions, and we can't necessarily blame everyone for not always having the right answer. But what we know as Christians is that we begin our thinking about this with Revelation, right? In Genesis, we know that man was created in God's image and likeness. Um, Now, unpacking what exactly that means takes a little bit of work. You could say that's what the work of salvation history was, right? Unpacking the meaning of what it means to be created in God's image and likeness, and then to be pursued through history by God Himself, sinners though we are. But the sort of first fact we could begin with is what does it mean to be asking who we are, right? Who asks who am I? Like that's
Mhm.
a very human question. Um, and as I said, as we come to understand more about who we are, it becomes clear, particularly to those of us who are Christians, who have faith, that the primary reference point, the beginning point for understanding ourselves is not our own thinking, is not what we see in the mirror. It's not even sort of our traditions or our cultures. The primary reference point for our self-understanding is God Himself. And this finds its sort of fullest expression in the incarnation, right? God became man to reveal Himself to us, but also to reveal to us the most fundamental truths and realities about what it means to be human. When God becomes man, when the incarnation happens, it fundamentally changes the horizon against which we understand what it means to be human. And so we sort of ascend from these initial questions: who am I? What does it mean to be even asking that question? Up towards the divine, and in Revelation we find um, uh, the key to understand, and then we can sort of descend from there, from our understanding of the incarnation to better understand ourselves and everything we do in our lives and how we organize our lives and how we ought to be living our lives. So there's this ascent and descent from the question is, who are we, up to God, and then back to understanding man. So God reveals man to Himself.
I think that's not only brilliant, but also deeply poignant, especially when you consider the the modern impetus of classifying everything human as there's a tension, there's a ridiculous tension. On the one hand, to err is human, to forgive is divine, and we'll all accept that. But on the other hand, the modern anthropology that divorces itself from the Christian revelation will try to argue that man is inherently good by nature. He is good and has no corruption in him. So very Rousseauan, right? Man is born free, everywhere else he's in chains. And the funny thing is, the modern culture doesn't see the dichotomy of it. So, could you please just help us make sense of that?
Well, I think one of the challenges we have today is that um, what we call secularism, right? So the turn of the modern world, at least in the developed world, in the last couple hundred years, it doesn't start from zero, right? It lives off of the sort of the momentum, the remaining momentum of a Christian worldview. To put it more negatively, it's parasitic. It
Mm.
presupposes and sort of feeds off the remains of a Christian worldview, but it doesn't account for those foundations itself. And so there are certain things that the contemporary world sort of holds as axiomatic about the goodness of human beings, or the idea of progress, which have sort of have roots in a Christian cosmology, or roots in a Christian understanding of the world, but they lack the sort of the starting place and the fundamentals. So it is true from a Christian point of view that we were created good, and it is true that we are meant to grow closer to God. So there's a kind of foundation for thinking of ourselves as good, and we know that nature is good. God created the world. He said that it was good. He created us, and he said we were very good. There's something in between there called the fall, right, which we forget at our own peril. And there's this idea that a Christian idea that history is going somewhere, right? That there is a culmination to history. It's not just sort of one thing after another. But if you take out sort of the divine element there, then it just becomes a history of merely human progress, which takes on a very different sort of aspect. So the contemporary modern world sort of borrows things from Christianity unwittingly, and then it sort of runs off in strange directions sometimes based on those premises, but it hasn't looked at what those premises are. It doesn't understand the sort of the foundations. And so what you can get is a world that has some good pieces to it, but because it doesn't have the full picture, it becomes sort of incoherent. And so we talk about this in terms of in secularization. We talk about this in terms of the church that we see around us. When we lose sight of God, we lose sight of ourselves, and bad things happen, right? But so the understated premise there is, at some point we had a sight of God that we could lose, right? And I don't mean before the fall. I mean that a more Christian, a more sort of a civilization that was more sort of infused with Christian truths, and took Christian sort of understanding of the universe as one of its starting points. As we lost that sense of God, all of the rest of the stuff we know about ourselves coming out of that civilization loses its coherence. And we keep doing certain things that we did before. We talk about justice, we talk about law, we talk about all these other things. But the reasons for the coherence of those ideas, our ability to comprehend those things as part of a systematic whole, we start to lose, and we become confused, and we lose sight of ourselves in that way. So when we lose sight of God, we lose sight of ourselves is true in sort of the broadest sense. We see this in the story of the fall. But it's also true as the sort of the story of secularism or secularization writ large. This is we had a civilization that saw the human person primarily in terms with a primary reference to God, and particularly to God incarnate. And as that view has faded, the coherence of our understanding of ourselves has faded. We've become confused, and we see evidence for this all around us.
And that evidence shows itself in modern ways, at the very least, through, like you rightly highlight, materialism. You also make a salient point in noting materialism results in inhumanism, which is hilarious to think about, because the promise of materialism, scientism, empiricism is that this was going to give human persons the greatest liberation. They're finally going to discover who they really are. But clearly, the promises have not been delivered upon.
Yeah, well, look, modern science and technology make us very powerful. But when we take too narrow a view, a materialist view or a scientistic view, we lose sight of the things that make us capable of using that power well, right? There's no merely scientific reason to prefer good over evil, right? There's no moral component to the scientific method in itself. It matters greatly who the scientists are and how we use the things that we learn and the technology that we have. And in a sense, the same term as a relic of sort of intellectual history. The same term.
If you don't mind, Stephen, we're going to have to pause there because the music is hitting. We're going to continue on the other side of the break. I'm talking with Stephen White. Stephen is Executive Director of the St. John Paul II National Shrine and Fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And we're talking about the meaning of the human person. The light shines in the darkness. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.